Good afternoon, Manqoba. Welcome to today. Well, more details emerged today in court about Senzo Meyiwa's final moments from Mthokozisi Twala. Can you just give us some highlights?
Certainly, Pradan. In fact, we heard just the final hours before Senzo Meyiwa, of course, was killed on the day of the 26th of October in 2014, when the intruders had allegedly come into the house and they then demanded cell phones and money from those that were in the house. I think yesterday, Mthokozisi Twala, detailing how he had seen two intruders coming into the house. One of them was carrying a firearm and the other one was carrying what appeared to be a sharp object, likely a knife at the time. And he also just gave a detail as to the scuffle that ensued just shortly after those two intruders had come into the house, saying that there were some of the occupants in the house that had tried to fight off these intruders. Those included Senzo Meyiwa as well as his friend Tumelo Madlalo, but also the mother of Kelly Khumalo, Gladness Khumalo, and Zali Khumalo had also tried to hit these intruders with the crutches that Tumelo Madlala had been using at the time. He says that that scuffle didn't last long. After that, they heard the gunshot going off, and there was a moment of silence when that happened. All of them were in shock, in disbelief that the gun had went off. Twala saying that he had then ran away from the house. In fact, he says when he tried to run away, he had then met Senzo Meyiwa along just close to the kitchen door, but he managed to run away and jumped over the neighbor's fence, and that is where he then alerted neighbors as to what was happening in the house. He returned back when he heard the screams from Kelly Khumalo's home, where he says that it was Kelly Khumalo's mother at the time who had been screaming, and this is when he returned to see Senzo Meyiwa lying down on the floor with blood oozing out of his body. He says that he went close to Senzo Meyiwa and pulled up his shirt to see the extent of the injury. That's when he discovered that he had been shot in the chest. He says that they had tried to then save his life. They brought towels to try and stop the bleeding, but also they had rushed to hospital to try and get him to hospital so that he can get the attention that he needed. And this is where he says he saw that Senzo Meyiwa was struggling. He says that his breathing had got down at the time, and also just the energy that he had, saying that at the time, just moments before he died, he had shown signs that, he had been trying to fight, but he was losing the fight at that particular point. But I want you to take a listen to what Mthokozisi Twala had to say about those moments when the gun went off.
Did you see as to who discharged this shot?
Ingabe wabona yini ukuthi ubani owaqhumisa leso sibhamu?
I
wouldn't say that I saw, but what I do know is that there was only one person who was in possession of a firearm there.
I understand he also spoke about how he was tortured by the police in 2019.
Indeed, Pradan, and in fact, he spoke at length about the investigation that had followed after Senzo Meyiwa was killed. Of course, the first investigation started back in 2014, where he says all the suspects, or rather the occupants that were there in the house, those that witnessed Senzo Meyiwa being shot, had been called by police on various occasions to do identity parades when there were suspects that the police had believed that had been linked to this particular crime. He says that he had done maybe more than 3 of those identity parades. But he spoke about an investigation that took place in 2019. And you recall that this is when the other docket in this particular matter, that being case 375, rather, Pradan, which implicates those that were in the house, was being investigated. He says that there was a time in January 2019 where the police had arrived at his house in Umlazi and they told him that they'd wanted him to go to another identity parade in Johannesburg. He says that when they arrived in Johannesburg, they passed, Johannesburg, and they went to Pretoria at the time. And this is where he realized that this was one of the lead investigators in this case, the office of that lead investigator in the case. He says that soon after that, that investigator then gone out of the office. There were two men that came, in fact, a couple of men that came into that particular room, and that's where they started interrogating him, some of them even saying that he had killed Senzo Meyiwa and they want the truth from him. He says that he then endured an interrogation from the police, and in fact almost a torture from police, saying that he had been assaulted for over an hour when he was there at that interrogation room. But it went beyond. He was also tied up at some point with his hands and feet bound together, and this is where he said he was suffocated by the police, who inserted a tube on his nose and mouth, and which made it quite difficult for him to be able to breathe. And I mean, it broke down, Pradan, when he was describing just what happened at that particular scene, and the trauma that he had suffered from this interrogation that he had been subjected to by the police at that particular point. Let's take a listen to how that happened according to Twala.
And then from Lapo, kwathi kusanjalo bengibambe kanjalo lo munye futhi wathatha into wakhipha itube.
Whilst they were holding me like that, the other one took out a tube.
And then they started tubing me.
What do you mean they choked you?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Bengichupa bathatha leli tube bengivala umlomo namakhala kanye base bayizoyifasa la ngemuva bayibambe bayiqinise kanje.
They would take the tube, then close my mouth as well as my nose at the same time, and then they would tie it tightly at the back.
So ngangilongiphelele umoya ke angithi uzoshona nje futhi lapha.
I would couldn't breathe. I would, even to such an extent that I thought that I would die there.
Leyo nto bayenza for babeshintshana for a good 3 to 4 hours.
They would taking turns. They would change. They were changing, and for a good 3 to 4 hours.
Why ngisho kanjalo indaba yesikhathi ngoba ngiyakhumbula ukuthi lapha ngafika after just ngabo past 10. Ukungishaya ngisho kwathatha a good hour, maybe bengishaya bengakangifaki itube. From itube babelokhu beshintshana omunye azalali ngilele la ungifasile la ngifasiwe izandla ulele yena la omunye ubhizu uyangichuba.
I am saying that, my lord, because the issue of the time, because when I arrived there it was after 10. The assault before the tubing took a good hour, and then when the tubing came, I was laying there. The other one would be busy with me, and then the other one would just be sleeping just next to me as they were changing each other.
Over the proceedings today adjourned to resume tomorrow. We expect Mthokozisi Twala to continue being cross-examined.
Indeed, Pradan. In fact, we expect Mthokozisi Twala to continue with his testimony in chief here at the court. I think the state just about to wrap up its evidence from Mthokozisi Twala, of course, which will be followed by cross-examination. There are quite a number of legal representatives that have now been part of this particular trial, and so we're expecting them to also quiz Mthokozisi Twala according to some of the testimony that he has given here in court, and those proceedings expected to continue tomorrow, Pradan.
Thank you very much, Manqoba Mchunu in Pretoria there, outside the High Court, where Mthokozisi Twala will be back in the dock tomorrow as he continues to give evidence in the Senzo Meyiwa murder trial.